Hi, I'm Leslie Anderson, Director of Collections, Exhibitions, and Programs at the National Nordic Museum in Seattle. Welcome to this morning's Artist Talk, held in conjunction with the exhibition Mother Tongues, Bodhild and Las Hermanas Iglesias. We're so fortunate to have this exhibition on view at the museum. It opened in early November and will close at the end of January 2022. And we're also very grateful for our sponsors' support of this exhibition, specifically For Culture, the D.V. and Ida J. McEachran Charitable Trust, Arts Fund, the Washington State Arts Commission, and the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Bodhild Iglesias was born in Norway, and she moved to New York City when she was 20 years old. Shortly thereafter, she fell in love with Bienvenido, a political scientist from the Dominican Republic, with whom she married and raised 4 daughters in Queens. Bodhild worked as a New York City public school teacher for 12 years, has skied since she was 2, knit since she was 9, and has collaborated with her youngest daughters for the past 15 years. Lisa received her MFA from the University of Florida and is currently an associate professor at Mount Holyoke College. Janelle received her MFA in sculpture from Virginia Commonwealth University and is an assistant professor at the University of California, San Diego. Bodhild, Lisa, and Janelle's collective projects have been featured at the Textile Arts Center, Brick, and New Mexico State Art Museum, among others. Welcome, Bodhild, Lisa, and Janelle.
Thank you so much, Leslie. It's so good to be here. And welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our conversation today. We feel really privileged to be here. Before we begin, I just want to do a quick shout out for the chat. At any point, if you would like to ask a question, please do feel free to put it into the chat so that we can start collecting some of your curiosities for the Q&A at the end. All right.
So I wanted to take this moment first to share our gratitude with so many of our loves, our artists, our friends that have supported us throughout the years. Our immediate family, our partners, our children, and we also really wanted to thank everybody at the museum that we've been working with, including Leslie, Peter, Kaya, Stina, Carly, Kate, so many others, all the staff, the docents, the security guards, the volunteers, folks that are working at the store and doing housekeeping, and so many community members that are part of the museum. We really wish that we could be there with you in person, but it's been amazing to work with you from afar.
Thanks so much.
We also wanted to do a quick territory acknowledgement. I'm Janelle, and I'm zooming in from San Diego, California, which is the unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation.
And myself and Bodhild, we are joining you from South Hadley, Massachusetts, located in Western Massachusetts on the ancestral land of the Nonotuck people. It is also important to acknowledge the neighboring Indigenous nations who continue to be connected to this land, the Nipmuc and the Wampanoag to the east, the Mohegan and the Pequot to the south, and the Mohican to the west, and the Abenaki to the north. So Janelle and I have been collaborating now since about 2005 as Las Hermanas Iglesias, as this formal entity. And Las Hermanas Iglesias means the Iglesias sisters in Spanish. We chose this moniker to reflect the kind of multiplicity of identities that we have as daughters, as Norwegian Dominicans, as the second youngest of 4 daughters. It kind of, that name contains a plurality, as well as reflects some of the languages that we grew up being exposed to and speaking to both in our family and in Queens.
So we wanted to talk a little bit about our family, since this is a familial project. So we are the youngest of 4 daughters. And I think Leslie shared a little bit about your story, Mom, about coming to New York in your 20s. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you came, and maybe, kind of a little bit about your first experiences in New York and in New York City?
I came as an au pair or mother's helper, and the reason behind it was to learn to speak English fluently. And I had a contract for a year with a family in Great Neck, New York, and Mr. and Mrs. Appel had 3 children, and I was their nanny and the lighthouse keeper for a year. I had a wonderful, wonderful time. They were great to be with, and they introduced me to many of the things in New York City. While I was there, I met Bienvenido, or Bill as we call him, and I actually had my wedding reception at the house where I had worked. And we are still the best of friends.
And Mom, can you tell us a little bit about Folldal and growing up in Folldal?
Folldal is a short valley between two major valleys. It runs from the northern part of Gudbrandsdal to the northern part of Alvdal. And this is the house that I grew up in. Here, my mother and father raised 7 children. And here we are at my baptismal day. I was supposed to have an American relative come and be my godmother, but they couldn't come for some reason. And so I am being held here by my father's mother, and my mother is sitting next to her. My father is behind her. And my godparents are the 2 to the left side in the back, my aunt and uncle. And some of my sisters and brothers are sitting in the front, and I see my oldest sister is the girl in the blue dress with the that's a sailor's outfit in the middle there, back there. Yeah, that's taken in front of the old barn at the farm.
So mother tongues, it became it became the name of the exhibition very early on. It was a way for us to reference the sort of translation processes that we think about when we're working with materials and collaborating together, as we'll talk more about in this presentation. And it contains the parentheses to both bring attention to the word mother, but also bring attention to this other part of the word of other, to break it down and open it up and unpack this word to all the kinds of ways that we can kind of consider our identities and our positionality. As we go forward in the presentation, we can see the definition of mother tongues. If you click forward, Janelle, and the presentation. The definition for mother tongues, Merriam-Webster defines mother tongue as one's native language or a language from which another language originates. Can you speak a little bit, Mom, about your connection to your mother tongue and your experience growing up with your native language in Folldal?
And maybe I should, for fun, say that in Norwegian, or in my dialect. I'm in that small valley. There is, I spoke a dialect called Daling. The rest as a unit, we spoke Folder. Daling is a very thick dialect. Og det høres slik ut. Mens jeg vokste opp, så pratet oss Daling sammen, og det var spesielt i Folldal. Mange ganger så det ingen som forstår akkurat det vi sier, så vi må passe oss litt når vi reiser til andre steder og snakke litt finere. På skolen så lærte vi nynorsk og bokmål. Bøkene var i begge deler. Men når vi prater om det som vi las, så tar vi nynorsk, eller dialekt. Senere, når jeg kom til high school, så lærte jeg engelsk, tysk, fransk, og når jeg giftet meg, så bodde vi i Dominican Republic etter vi pensjonerte oss, så da lærte jeg spansk.
Thanks, Mom. And so a lot of these thoughts about languages, the multiplicity of experiences and translation from a written form to a spoken form, or just or various ways of language and meaning existing. These are some of the inspirations behind the show. And as we go forward and show you some of these images, we'll talk a little bit about where our inspirations and influences came from. Here you can see one of the long hallways in the Nordic Museum, sort of like the entryway into the exhibition. and we'll give you a sort of viewpoint into the rest of the show. So from here, we can see one of the next kind of centerpieces of the show, a painting of the Rondane Mountains. Mom, can you speak a little bit about this painting? Because this one in particular, Mom, you focused as a sort of an individual work and worked on this by yourself. Can you speak a little bit about this piece?
Yes, this I was inspired by this picture because these mountains, or Rondane Mountains, we can see from anywhere on my farm or just about anywhere in the valley. It's a major mountain range south of the valley. And so I had a niece send me a picture, and tusen tack, Hanne Katarina. She sent me the picture taken from a mountaintop way on the other side of the valley, and it just gave such a beautiful view of the valley, and it was all in bluish colors. So I said, well, I gotta gather wool, all kinds of blue colors, and knit this picture because it's fantastic. And so that knitting is what came from that inspiration. And I have asked people from my valley if they recognize it, and they say, yeah, of course we recognize Rondane Mountains. That's exactly how they look like. But they also can identify some of the farms, which are white because there is still snow on the ground inside on the bottom of the valley. My home farm you cannot see because it's hidden by one of the hills on the left lower side.
Thanks, Mom. Themes of landscape and various viewpoints continue throughout the exhibition. So here inside of one of the larger galleries inside of the Nordic Museum, you can see further examples of knit paintings that have connections to works on paper. So as Bodhild was talking about the connection between the photograph of the Rondane Mountains and the knit painting, here you can see an example of a work on paper and its knit painting counterpart.
One of the reasons we really love we've been making this work for a number of years, but seeing it all together at the Nordic Museum was also to really explicitly have this kind of conversation between works and conversation about representation and abstraction. And, one of the things that becomes very interesting to us was this relationship with representation of the mountains, and how much this work also of the Rondane Mountains also speaks as an abstract painting as well. And so we're gonna kind of go through some installation shots in the museum that feature different ways of walking around works that are hanging in 3 dimensions. And so what we're looking at are 2 armatures or structures from which some of the knit works are hanging from. There also is a hand woven mata, which is a rag rug that was knit by our grandmother, by Beau's mother, incorporated into the installation. And we'll talk a little bit more about all the inspirations that came together for this body of work, and kind of work a little bit backwards.
This show incorporates quite a number of knit paintings that range from paintings that were created in perhaps like 2015 and on. And these the knit paintings that you can see on the screen right now are some of the ones that are created precisely for the exhibition. And as you can see, there's a variety of visual metaphors and visual vocabulary ranging from parts of the body to references to linear, perhaps text, or in other places, you might see images of things that we've been influenced And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. As we go forward, we're also going to talk about some of our individual work. Janelle and I are individual independent practitioners as well. Janelle's work is rooted in sculpture, and my work is rooted in painting and drawing. And as we work together with our mom, your work is mainly rooted in textiles and this sort of utilitarian approach historically to textiles, to knitting and to crochet and making clothing. And so can you speak a little bit about the images that we're seeing here, Mom?
Yeah, these are all very typical things that the grandmothers knit or mothers knit for their kids. I grew up with my mother always having knitting in her hands if she sat still. And sometimes she also, if she walked with the cows to bring them to a new pasture, she would bring her knitting along. So she walked knitting, she sat knitting. I don't know if she slept and knit at the same time. She had a lot of knitting to do with 7 kids. And when we all moved out, then she had room for a big loom so she could take up weaving again, which she had learned when she was a young girl. I don't know from whom, but anyway, these diamonds and triangles that you see on this matte was her signature. Weaving. She got tired of just the stripes. She was very good at putting different stripes together to make it a very lovely color view. But everybody who saw these diamonds in somebody else's house knew that that was Sophia who had woven those. And people would bring bags of old clothes. My father would knit them into strips, and my mother would weave them for people. And that's how she earned herself a little bit extra money in her olden days. And she and my dad would sit and talk as they collaborated together with us.
I think a lot of those kind of actions of knitting and reusing have filtered throughout our family in a variety of different ways, and in ways that Janelle and I were not necessarily cognizant of to begin with. Like, these are examples of some of the first works that Janelle and I started collaborating together with. This is while we're in grad school. I was in Florida and Janelle was in Virginia, and we began to send works on paper back and forth through the mail. Here you can see on the lower left hand a piece of paper that's been put through the sewing machine many, many times. There is masking tape and linen and tracings of shadows and all sorts of different materials and gestures that get layered and layered on top of each other. And those works on paper really started Janelle and my collaboration as Las Hermanas Iglesias. And as we go forward, we can see different ways that we begin to also layer these gestures and images that became apparent during of the works on paper. So one of the first projects that we did together is called Everybody Likes to Dance, that you can see on the screen here, in which Janelle and I invited our parents, Bodhild and Bienvenido, to curate a song that represented for them that dance and kind of celebration from their youth. So if we scroll forward, we can hear a bit of this music that we invited DJs and musicians to create a mashup of a merengue and a pulse. And this is one of the songs that is a consequence of that. You can hear in the song parts of the merengue and part of the pulse. Those parts of the music are conserved, and many of the songs, there were these really danceable moments. In other parts of the songs, there was dissonance and static, and we're interested in that kind of range of things that happen when when different motifs and traditions are mashed up together, which was very much our experience growing up in Queens, New York. So as we move forward, you can also see the poster. And here it was directly influenced by Andy Warhol with one of his dance diagrams. We created a choreography that blended the merengue and the pulse.
And these projects were often a way of both exploring our familial history, our family's culture, our relationship as siblings, our relationship to our parents, and a kind of tool for us to dig in deeper on different levels. Our works often also have a kind of participatory component to them. And so this installation has been shown in many different iterations, but it's also been shown with a kind of series of handmade disco balls that reflect the colors of the Dominican flag, American flag, and Norwegian flag, which are all red, white, and blue in different compositions. And this dance floor in which people are invited to take off their shoes and interpret the choreography based on the diagram. And this kind of strategy of thinking about mashups and creating new cultural phenomenons from mashups has been a theme and a strategy throughout our work. This is a poster that we made called Bacalao Klipfisk. And so bacalao or klipfisk is the term for salted cod. And we found it really interesting that this was one of the few foods that overlapped both in Norwegian cuisine and in Dominican cuisine. And in kind of thinking about it and looking into it, the production of salt cod, dates back at least 500 years. It was a specific technology where fish wasn't just simply dried, but it was also salted. And so it was dried and cured, and it made it more versatile and suitable for long journeys to last, much longer. So this was one of the kind of technologies that Spanish and Portuguese explorers brought to the quote unquote New World, and how fish from Northern Norway became very popular in many Latin American countries. So we're in this poster, we're kind of looking at this overlap in cuisine, and we're taking direct recipes verbatim from asking our mom how to make foods that we ate growing up, such as pannekake, Norwegian pancakes. And Lisa's going to put Bodhild's recipe in the chat, as well as a link to a more formalized recipe. And this poster also includes different suggestions for mashup recipes, such as Norwegian pancakes with guava jelly and white cheese, or fried sweet plantains with cardamom and sea salt.
I just want to put something in there with the bacalao.
Yeah.
It's funny that I had never tried bacalao in my home mountain town until I came to Dominican Republic. And then, of course, I got lots and lots of bacalao. I only know the klipfisk or as lutefisk, which I'm sure all Norwegian Americans have heard about.
Here we can see another early work in our collaboration. Janelle and my collaboration is Las Hermanas Iglesias, the Adidas Superstar 2.0 sneakers, made famous by Run DMC, who are from Hollis, Queens. And here you can see a kind of fusion or a mixing and layering between traditional Rusmalling painting, or at least an attempt at Rusmalling painting, and Dominican motifs. This
really
sorry.
Really, in our collaboration, one of the fun things about doing projects with our family is we get to finish each other's sentences and interrupt each other, and it becomes even more, I think, fun over Zoom. Yeah, but yeah, one of our early ideas was also thinking about our relationship as sisters was one of the themes that we were exploring early on in our collaboration, and so we asked our mom to knit a dress that would kind of create us as conjoined twins. We grew up kind of being treated as twins or the same age, and we were often referred to as a single unit, to sort of Lisa and Janelle. And so we did these kind of creative gestures, braiding our hair together, fixing our nails together, and wearing this dress in different scenarios for possible performances where we were conjoined.
Connection and disconnection also another kind of mainstay of our practice. Lost Glove is a project that we worked on when we began a residency in Paris through the LMCC program, where we would take countless walks, and we decided to incorporate found objects into one of our projects. And one of the most common objects that we would find on our walks was a lost glove, which we totally invited as a sort of metaphor for something or some entity that needed to be reunited with its lost other half. And so we took this opportunity to create gouache on paper paintings of the missing glove. And through that sort of decision, Janelle and I really started to continue to think about ways that we can blur lines between sculpture and works on paper, or sculpture and painting, sculpture and drawing. As you can see here in this detail, the works on paper are cut out and create their own shadow on the wall, so exist as three-dimensional objects as well. It was also an opportunity for us to trade skills and to teach each other things that we had picked up in our education and in different parts of our lives, and we would kind of trade different ways of how we make work, which continues to filter throughout our practice. In the next project, you'll see that we really thought very kind of clearly about the three-dimensional, and thinking about self-portraits, thinking about the three-dimensional object as a self-portrait, but also as this participatory kind of influx kind of sculpture. So Janelle creating her own pinata of herself, and then I creating a self-portrait of myself, and then we would take turns bashing the other's pinata, again alluding to sibling rivalry in our relationship as sisters. And the viewer was invited to take candy from the sculptures, and that was a direct nod to Felix Gonzalez Torres with his series of works that are piles of candy in the corner, such as this work that you can see here. And this idea of sibling rivalry has also threaded through many of our projects, with the sibling rivalry series, where we commit to all sorts and ways of comparing ourselves to each other, of competing with each other. Here we're in this project, it's the Commiserates project, where we empathize with each other going through experiences of pregnancy, here in 2012 and here in 2021. And throughout these processes, our mother definitely collaborates in all sorts of ways, including being a photographer, as you can see in this project for the Commiserates series, or as a referee in this series of performative competitions in front of an audience.
So we can see her holding the sign saying there's no bad weather, there's only bad clothing, which was a kind of saying in our household when we grew up in terms of being able to play outside, and a kind of wise words from Norway that carried over into Queens. And in our competitions, we're often dealing with these kind of absurdist gestures that poke fun at things like beauty pageants. In this one, you can see Lisa has a mouthful of cherries. This is a cherry eating contest, but we're also having to walk around with high heels on our heads. High heels and books on our heads, like we were in a beauty pageant. So thinking about a feminist lens through which our work is presented is always been important to us. This is a project called Nude Suits, where Bodhild knit full-length knit suits in line with the measure of our bodies and our tan lines, and where we, there's hair, there are nipples that are sewn on. Here are some in-process shots of, I think, Mom, you're sewing on the nipples in this image, perhaps. And here we are kind of making sure that the armpit hair is laying correctly and is the right length. And then these nude suits were these kind of performative, they were objects that were displayed in the gallery, and also these costumes that we would wear in these kind of performative photographs, right? Where we're also referencing tropes of our history and the nude in art history, and thinking about the idea of self-portraiture also, and sort of the nude within nature, And this is an image of Lisa and her oldest child, Bowie. When Bowie turned a year old, our mom made him a birthday suit, a nude suit. And this photo was actually taken in Norway, close to Folldal.
So a variety of textile traditions has been really integral to much of our work, and a variety of artists have inspired us, including Rosemary Treckle with her knitting pictures. And in this work, machine knit paintings are really challenging this kind of this very masculinized idea of art history, sort of challenge in a feminist critique of an art history trajectory. And so we often think about the role of textiles, the role of craft, and the role of using domestic objects in our work. As you can see in the next slide, a show at Present Company Gallery, where much of the work included in the show came from our home in Queens, much to the chagrin of our mom. You can see in the next painting how we are continuing to think about the blurring the boundaries between sculpture and painting. In this painting that's inspired by the shaped canvases of Ellsworth Kelly. And in back of this canvas that we just showed you has a this mechanism that allows you to open this painting to reveal other works inside of it. And so this kind of these inspirations that we have from art history or from each other, turning kind of object-oriented existence into sort of like a three-dimensional existence into a two-dimensional existence, like taking a found object of a piece of luggage and turning it in, translating it into a painting on paper, while still referencing the kind of sculptural origin of the work. That continues throughout our practice. And this kind of relationship between sculpture and drawing and painting and works on paper has continued from that very early work that we showed you in the beginning of the presentation. So here we can see a salon style hanging of, or a grid rather, hanging of works on paper. And as we move forward, we can see works on paper that Janelle and I continue to send back and forth through the mail, that work on in person, that begin to accrue layers and layers of gestures and marks. And these works, eventually then we started to think about translating them into knit paintings, taking that cue and continuing to being part of that conversation of the false binary between craft and fine art. And so when we began to approach Bodhild about translating the works on paper into knit paintings, and that's kind of how this kind of series really began to develop with these first works that you can see here.
And one of the things that we found so interesting was the kind of slippage that happens in any kind of translation, that you can't do a direct, one-to-one in a different language necessarily, or in a different medium. And so there are certain kinds of compromises and certain kinds of new creative problem-solving solutions that come up and that arise, that become really, really interesting and kind of these different wormholes then to go down and explore. And the different kinds of formal investigations and strategies that we had been thinking about in different works we're also combining with this strategy of translation. And so here's a shaped canvas that also has a handle and is on a hinge, but this time it's also a knit painting. So also we're thinking about this, what the image that you see underneath, that it having this kind of relationship to an object and being three-dimensional, not only having one face, and also integrating works by other members of our family into the mix as well. So some of the sculptural elements that you see behind the knit painting are made by Lisa's son, Bowie. And also that, things that are happening in our personal and private and familial lives creep into the work. And so this was a period upon which we were playing a lot of peekaboo and hide and go seek with children. And this kind of idea of the reveal became really interesting in terms of a kind of, formal delight that one finds with hide and seek and finding new things.
Here we're at a show at Ortega y Gasset, one of the first opportunities that we had to show our work with Bodhild very directly. And so here we can see that Bodhild knitting the front of the cover of an Ortega y Gasset tome, and then installing at the show so that we were able to show, at that point we had developed kind of this body of work of translations between works on paper and turning it into fabric that then became bean bags and in paintings. And this was also the first time that we approached Bowie to create the soundtrack or an audio track for the show. So to each of this work, he created this kind of interpretation that was another kind of counterpoint for the viewer to interact with.
Here's an example of one of the tracks from this show. I believe this is 2018.
Close your eyes for 10 minutes. What does it smell like? What does it look like? I love your imagination. It's so good. Take a friend if you want to. Okay, now it's time to go, lovers. We're time to go.
Following this opportunity, we had the amazing privilege of having a residency at the Textile Art Center in Brooklyn, New York, where Bodhild was the primary resident in person, while Janelle was located in San Diego and myself in Gainesville, Florida. And so building a textile community, kind of re-communing with techniques such as weaving and getting to really connect with this other kind of broad base of techniques and folks working was really, really generative for us. During this time, we really continued to think about folks like Anni Albers and ideas about kind of transforming or revisiting a sort of categorization or pigeonholing of craft and other kind of textile traditions.
And Anni Albers is really attributed to somebody within our history that really broke down this divide between textiles as a craft form and being considered fine art. So, we were thinking about this kind of matriarch of modern textile work and the kind of matriarchs of our own family as inspirations for different kinds of formal, techniques, whether they be employing translation or whether they be also employing these new conversations between works and ways of display that privilege both the backside and front side of works in conversation with each other.
Here is a viewpoint of Munch's bedspread that Bodhild and I were really lucky to see when we were visiting Oslo at some point. And so even things like this, whether we're working in person or traveling in person or visiting each other, some of these patterns and gestures and color palettes around us feed into the work, as you can see in this knit painting that's directly referencing Munch.
And one of the beautiful things about this collaboration has also been this opportunity to continue these kind of work intensives together through residencies. And this was a residency that we attended in Guatemala through La Nueva Fabrica organization. And they are a residency that is attached to a weaving carpet making factory. And as residents, you have access to their facilities, to dyeing yarn, to kind of cast off, surplus yarns as well, and to, trying out these kinds of different looms. And at this residency was really a wonderful kind of focused, intense few weeks of learning together and working together that we wanted to experiment with trying other modes of collaborating and other kind of formal ideas that speak maybe a little bit more to a dialogic back and forth that was the kind of impetus of the original drawings. And so here you can see different squares, made separately that are being pieced together, and then figuring out ways of which we're going to assemble them all together, and different formal interventions with different materials being combined on top of a knit surface. So integrating weavings or sewing or embroidery also onto a knit surface.
And at the New Roots Foundation, we were able to explore all sorts of these ways of working together, where we learned from each other and we skill swapped, and we were able to make many of the works that eventually came together and were developed and finalized for the Nordic Museum.
And this is an image from a natural dye workshop where we learned all about natural dye techniques. And this is something that we're currently really excited about pushing towards the next body of work that we're going to move forward with in terms of thinking really critically about the materiality of what we're knitting with and how it accrues its color.
At the Nordic Museum, there is a takeaway poster involved, and we wanted to give a little bit of background to where we're coming with that. So we're directly influenced by, again, Felix Gonzalez Torres, who created these takeaways it really is this kind of activated sculpture that dwindles with each kind of takeaway that the viewer commits to. And it proliferates messages, and it's an opportunity for us to merge kind of our politics and poetry and to play with language. And to create this kind of free gift economy, or this kind of accessibility to sharing artwork as a way to connecting also the gallery to the viewer's home. And so the takeaway poster for the Nordic Museum was created was designed by Bowie Catskill Hermanas Iglesias, as you can see here with the mother tongues drawing. And then in the next slide, you can see that he was directly also drawing, making drawings in reaction to the works on paper and the knit paintings. So then another kind of process of reinterpretation and remixing and translation to see how something can kind of shift and grow. So those drawings were then, we were then redesigning those into a double-sided poster that can be folded into an 8-page zine. I'm going to put into the chat a link for the Quarantine Public Library, which is an accumulation of one-page artist books to print and collect at home.
And one of the things we were excited about with creating a coloring book for this show was both kind of having something that was geared towards maybe younger audience members, as well as, and something that was a kind of family-friendly activity for folks to take home, as well as having, something that where people kind of directly collaborated with us in a way, where, these are kind of further, there's a further translation of Bowie making a line drawing of a work that's integrated into the show, and then someone also then adding their own color palette and their interpretation onto the piece. And so it becomes this kind of new collaborative document as well.
All of these colors and kind of back and forth and skill sharing, color palettes and patterns and kind of intergenerational conversations and interactions are all woven together into this show. And as you can see, there's in every moment, there's an opportunity to reflect many different viewpoints or many different hands, and sort of like the residue of the hand and the handmade, as well as like the back and forth. You can see the back of the textiles and see how things are done. So a transparency of means and making, as well as like this kind of upholding and kind of maximized conversation about collectivity and sort of transparency about working together.
And so, this is a kind of sharing of works that we've done that are through a lens of really works that explore our family dynamic and works that are kind of highlighting our own history with textiles and then our own history of collaborating and working with Bow. But if you also go to our website, you can see, all of our collaborative, there's a kind of archive of our collaborative work, as well as archives of our individual practice as well. And we always also update our news with kind of, new talks or new exhibitions and things that are going on as well. So please, visit the website. Feel free to reach out to us over email as well if you'd like to be in touch, or over Instagram or whatnot. I think we wanted to open it up to some questions.
Thank you so much, Lisa, Janelle, and Bodhild. I'm also really pleased that you talked about the takeaway posters and the invitation for visitors to contribute to the conversation. When I first experienced your work at the Utah Museum of Fine Arts for the exhibition Here, that was, I think, one of the most important experiences for me and for the visitors. Can you talk a little bit about the reception by visitors of this more kind of participatory element?
What your question reminds me of something that happened in Everybody Likes to Dance, where Janelle and I were super, super interested in the moment when people would go up on the stage and participate with the project in ways that were entirely of their own design. Like, folks were not necessarily interested in following the dance diagram, but rather it became the site for them to do whatever they wanted within that space. And the work became activated in ways we couldn't even imagine. And then it was non-prescriptive, and we became viewers as well. Like that, we became witnesses to an art unfolding that we could not have foreseen. And that's really exciting. And so when there's something like a takeaway poster where people have sent us images of what they do with the work, and they can interact with this piece of paper however they like, that kind of unexpected, unanticipated surprise is really gratifying and really exciting. And I think it continues this kind of challenging to authorship that we're also really interested in. Like, one of the reasons why I think the collaboration is interesting to us is really challenging this notion of the lone, often male genius in their studio toiling away. And I think that we're interested in challenging that idea and opening up these lines and kind of blurring the lines between spectator and, quote unquote artist, and, lines between disciplines and things like that. So I think that the takeaway posters can often allow us to do that, because people can do whatever they want with this object, whether it's a zine, whether it's printed paper, whether it's like a small piece of clay, or like a box oriented object, like in Here, and they can kind of turn it into whatever they want. And that entropy is really exciting.
Yeah, I think that having something that you can like hold in your hand and touch, because so often at museums we can't touch anything. And there's something kind of wonderful about having an intimate experience with an object, being able to feel its weight or fold it or hold on to it. And then also being able to give it to somebody else or put it in the mail and send it to a friend, or that it becomes an object that it might hang on your refrigerator or fall behind your couch, or it has its own history all of a sudden, an own future, with depending on what you do with it. And then what Lisa was speaking to with in terms of like authorship too, I think with the audio tour, it's this, alternative kind of narration of a show. And it's an alternative way in that narration and audio tour that Bowie does for the show. He often asks you to go find a certain painting. So it's a little bit of a treasure hunt, or a little bit of him directing via what track you're listening to, a kind of interpretation of a particular work to direct your attention to. And that's just like one possible way to interact with the show. And also, I think, really valuing not just our own intentions about what we wanted to instill, or what we thought was going on visually with each work, but kind of honoring whatever experience somebody else might bring to their interpretation of the work. It's really fun and exciting for us to share, and kind of also encourage folks to have their own interpretations, and not to necessarily think that there's only one way to experience that work. And I think that's also part of the exciting thing about abstraction in general, right? Is how much we can each bring to our own interpretations of what's before us.
It no doubt lends to a very accessible experience for the visitor. So we have a couple of questions that have come in. One, it thanks you for your wonderful talk, and they are wondering how you think about breaking down binaries. Specifically, you talked about the false binary of art versus craft, and maybe more specifically hierarchies as you work across generations. They're particularly interested in how you invite Bowie to collaborate with you.
That's a great question. We have thought about different ways. So going back to also, it brings back this idea of like the multiplicity of ways that one can collaborate or cooperate, right? There's many different definitions of what collaboration, how it can even exist. And so we've been collaborating with Bowie now for a long time. And at first it was about inviting him into the process, which he very willingly and excitedly did. And he was with us in person and would just join in. The invitation was out there and he would just join in. For this show, it's shifted. Now he's 9 years old and we invite him. And now it's become much more of like this contractual agreement where he talks about what can make this experience have equity for him. I mean, and from his point of view, it's like, well, why should I do this? What's the incentive for him? And so he lists what he feels comfortable with, right? And what would make it be worth his time. And we talk about this and we draw up a contract. And I talk about the different ways that artists are compensated for their time and different ways that different people are compensated for their time, and talking about children, talking about people of all ages, how their work and their labor is reciprocated. And so it brings up lots of interesting notions, right? For this project, we compensated him. He chose to be compensated monetarily for each drawing that he would make of an interpretation of a knit painting. And so we worked that out. We also worked out a compensation system for the audio tracks. So that's continuing to shift in really interesting ways, like because Janelle and Bodhild and myself, we talk about, reciprocity and mutuality all the time, and making sure that we're all here and we all want to be here. And that those conversations continue on with Bowie as well, in really interesting ways that I think he feels really proud when he sees the objects exist in the world. Like he's excited about that poster. And he definitely, there have been times we invite him to collaborate and he's like, no, I don't want to. So that's also changing.
Yeah. And I think that happens with Lisa and I and Bo as well, in terms of whatever else is on our plate, whatever else. Mom, I know you have some Christmas knitting deadlines right now, and that's your priority. And we're honoring that. We're not going to ask you to do anything. You got your own deadlines, your own priorities going on. And so, yeah, I think that one of the things that has kept our collaboration really healthy and is the flexibility that we've had since we started. Because also when we started collaborating, we were at graduate school in different places, but we had then come together, and we knew that wasn't necessarily going to be for always. And so we knew that our collaboration couldn't always be that we did every single step of the work together. And so for different projects, we take on different roles. There's different relationships to who does what. And with each project, we establish like what we want to get out of it, which kinds of things we're trying to privilege in terms of learning or social relationships, or new, ground in the studio, what we're trying to do. But also, we also allow ourselves to take different strategies with what that collaboration might look like, and also to break our own rules. If we find ourselves settling into a pattern where maybe we're kind of establishing a way of doing something, we often create a project to totally disrupt that and see what happens when there's a different mode or a different way of working completely privileged, to see what happens then.
And it brings up all these political conversations, because that question and, the including ideas of hierarchy and systems of oppression, they're interlaced between all of our decision-making as humans in a community. And so we try to very directly anticipate and meet those kind of nuances head on. And in the chat, someone mentioned about what Bodhild is currently knitting. Do you feel comfortable? Are you open to sharing what you're knitting right now?
Sure. And I think it's fun to mention right now. I asked Bowie, because I wanted to knit him a sweater for Christmas, and I asked him, what kind of sweater would you like? He said, something with flames. He drew something for me, which has now become this. This is the front part. And then he wanted to have a skull on the back. So here is the skull for the back part.
You know, very festive, Christmassy.
And I'm currently, because I'm just sitting here, so I might as well be productive. And I'm working on the sleeves. And they have no patterns on it.
That's so fun to see that, Mom. I had heard about that, but I hadn't seen it either. And I love that earlier question too about breaking down binaries. And I think, Lisa and I attended graduate school. Lisa was in a drawing and painting program, and I was in a sculpture program. And I think we early on also identified our own desires to maybe work to kind of expand our practice beyond these particular genres that we had studied and we felt more comfortable in. But I think you also, you have a certain amount of pressure as an artist to maintain a kind of cohesive body of work as you move forward. And so when we first started collaborating, Las Hermanas was a kind of way for us to establish a sense of freedom beyond any of those expectations. And I think we always felt that as a collaborative team, we could do whatever was part of our curiosity. We could continue to collaborate with other people, other artists, other communities, other family members. There were no real rules that we were going to impose on ourselves. And so when we do find that we are sticking to certain kinds of rules or binaries, we do try to disrupt those on purpose. And we find that kind of creation of a sense of freedom and creative problem solving and pushing and expanding ourselves is kind of the whole point, in a way, of the collaborative process and the collaborative project at large.
Lisa, Janelle, Bodhild, I want to thank you so much for producing this amazing body of work that we're able to share with the visitors of the National Nordic Museum, and for providing the background, the thinking around your works. It's wonderful.
Thank you so much, Leslie. It's been a privilege to work with you in the Nordic Museum.
Such a wonderful opportunity to take all this work and put it in one space together. And thank you so much also for your curatorial vision and help with putting it all together. Leslie, it was really fun to work with you.
It was a pleasure.